Hey guys, tonight we're going to dig into something truly ancient, something that lay buried for thousands of years, just waiting for the right, or perhaps, wrong, moment to reappear. Imagine, for a second, the scorching sun beating down on your neck, the fine dust clinging to your eyelashes, the distant rumble of heavy machinery vibrating through the very ground beneath your worn-out boots. You're on a modern construction site, surrounded by the cacophony of progress, completely oblivious to the secrets sleeping just inches below your feet. It's hard, dirty work, the kind that makes you question your life choices, and frankly, you probably won't survive this without a serious reevaluation of your career path. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're tuning in from, and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across the uneven terrain, the ground a patchwork of freshly turned earth and compacted gravel. The air is thick with the smell of diesel fumes and dry soil, a scent that will forever be etched into your memory, long after this particular shift ends. You're part of a crew, a small cog in a massive machine, tasked with carving out a new highway through what feels like an endless expanse of Jordanian desert. It's the mid-1970s, specifically 1974, and the world is buzzing with new technologies, disco music, and a general sense of forward momentum. Yet, here you are, engaged in one of humanity's oldest endeavors, moving dirt. You wipe a bead of sweat from your brow, feeling the grit of it, and squint against the glare. The sun is relentless, a giant, fiery eye in the pale blue sky, seemingly determined to bake every ounce of moisture from your body. Your tool for the day is a shovel, or perhaps you're operating one of those hulking bulldozers, its engine a constant, rhythmic growl that becomes less a sound and more a part of your own pulse. You're focused, but your mind is also drifting, as it often does during repetitive tasks. You might be thinking about the lukewarm tea you'll have on your next break, or the blister forming on your palm, or maybe even wondering if the local falafel stand will have that extra spicy sauce today. It's mundane. It's monotonous. It's just another day at the office, except your office is a vast, dusty construction pit, and your colleagues are mostly quiet, weathered men who communicate more through grunts and hand gestures than actual words. You guide the heavy blade of your machine, or sink your shovel into the earth, feeling the familiar resistance of compacted soil, the occasional stubborn rock. There's a particular stretch of ground today, an unassuming rise that feels no different from any other, but as your blade bites deeper, you feel something unusual. It's not the sharp, grating scrape of rock on metal, nor the yielding give of loose earth. Instead, there's a muffled thud, a peculiar, almost soft resistance, as if you've just nudged something hollow? Or perhaps something unexpectedly brittle. Your first thought, naturally, is annoyance. Probably just some old, buried pipe, or maybe a rogue piece of concrete from a previous, forgotten project. This is a road, after all, things get buried. You sigh inwardly. Another delay. Another thing to report to the foreman, who will inevitably sigh even louder than you did. You back up the bulldozer a foot or two, or you step back from your shovel and lean in for a closer look. The earth, disturbed, reveals a patch of something lighter, almost white, against the reddish-brown soil. It's not rock. It's too uniform, too smooth in places. You tap it gently with the edge of your shovel, and a small flake breaks off, revealing a fine, almost powdery texture beneath. It looks like plaster? That's odd. Who buries plaster out here, in the middle of nowhere? You kneel, brushing away more of the dirt with your gloved hand, curiosity slowly overriding your initial irritation. As more of the white material is exposed, a shape begins to emerge. It's curved, not jagged like a natural stone. It feels strangely deliberate. You clear a bit more, and then your breath catches. You see it. An eye. Not a real eye, of course, but the unmistakable outline of an eye, deeply set, wide, staring up at the harsh desert sky from its millennia-long slumber. And then another, beside it. And then a nose, a mouth. It's a face. A human face, rendered in this strange, chalky material. Your heart gives a little jump, not of fear, but of profound, disorienting surprise. This isn't a pipe. This isn't concrete. This is something else entirely. Something ancient. You stop. Everything stops. The roar of your bulldozer, which had been a constant companion, now feels strangely absent. The distant shouts of your colleagues, the rhythmic clanging from another part of the site, they all fade into a muffled background hum. All you can hear is the frantic thump-thump of your own blood in your ears. You stare at the face, and it stares back, its large, stylized eyes seeming to hold an entire forgotten world within their silent gaze. It's almost comical, this sudden, profound interruption of modern infrastructure by an ancient, unexpected visitor. You half expect it to wink at you and ask for directions to the nearest coffee shop. You call out, your voice hoarse, probably from the dust, or maybe from the sudden jolt of adrenaline. Hey! Over here! You gotta see this! Your foreman, a grizzled veteran named Abdul, ambles over, squinting in the sun. He's seen a lot of things unearthed in his time: old coins, rusted tools, the occasional unexploded ordnance, which, let's be honest, is far more terrifying than an old statue. But as he looks down into the small trench you've created, his usual gruff expression softens, then widens in disbelief. More shapes are now becoming visible in the surrounding earth, parts of other figures, tangled together, as if they were sleeping in a communal bed. It's not just one face. It's many. This accidental discovery, made during routine road construction in the outskirts of Amman, Jordan, was about to rewrite entire chapters of prehistory. Before this moment, archaeologists had a general understanding of the Neolithic period in the Near East, but the sheer scale and sophistication of what you've just stumbled upon were completely unprecedented. Historians still argue whether the initial recognition of the site's significance was immediate, or if it took a few days for the full weight of the discovery to sink in for the local authorities and the first archaeologists called to the scene. What is certain is that the site, Ain Ghazal, was about to become one of the most important archaeological digs of the 20th century. You stand there, a simple construction worker, covered in dust and sweat, having inadvertently peeled back a layer of time thousands of years thick. The air, once filled with the scent of diesel, now seems to carry a faint, earthy aroma, a whisper from the past. You can almost feel the presence of the ancient hands that sculpted these forms, the quiet dedication, the profound purpose that led to their creation and eventual burial. It's a strange feeling, this sudden, intimate connection to people who lived and breathed in a world utterly alien to your own, a world where these figures were not curious artifacts, but vital, living parts of their community. The work on the highway grinds to a halt. The bulldozers fall silent. The shovels lie abandoned. In their place, a new kind of activity begins. Delicate brushes replace heavy machinery. Careful trowels take over from broad shovels. Archaeologists, their faces alight with a mixture of excitement and reverence, descend upon the site. They move with a quiet intensity, their movements precise, almost surgical, as they begin the painstaking process of uncovering what you, with your mechanical might and simple shovel, had so powerfully, yet accidentally, revealed. It's a surreal shift, from the brute force of modern engineering to the gentle touch of historical preservation. You watch, perhaps a little bewildered, as the very ground you were planning to pave over transforms into a window into a truly ancient human story. It's like finding a hidden room behind a loose brick in your grandmother's house, only this room is 9,000 years old, and it contains secrets that will change our understanding of early human civilization. And you, my friend, were the one who kicked down the door. Or, gently scraped it with a shovel. Same difference. The figures continue to emerge, one after another, from the embrace of the earth. Some are tall, almost life-sized, others smaller. They are stylized, with those distinctive wide eyes, and they seem to possess an uncanny stillness, a presence that transcends their plaster forms. They are fragile, incredibly so, having survived millennia of geological shifts, water erosion, and now, the very brink of modern development. It's a quirky tidbit to consider that these priceless, delicate artifacts came within inches, perhaps even millimeters, of being utterly pulverized by heavy machinery, turned into nothing more than chalky dust by the relentless march of progress. But fate, or perhaps the earth itself, had other plans. It held them safe, waiting for just the right moment, for just the right shovel, to bring them back into the light. And as the sun begins to dip below the horizon, casting long, dramatic shadows across the newly exposed figures, you can almost hear them whispering, not just to the archaeologists, but to you, the accidental discoverer, a silent greeting from a world long past. You slowly open your eyes, not to the harsh glare of a modern construction site, but to the soft, diffused light filtering through a narrow opening in a mud brick wall. The air, surprisingly, doesn't smell of diesel fumes or freshly turned earth, but of wood smoke, sun-baked clay, and something vaguely animalistic, a hint of sheep, perhaps, or goats. You've slipped backward through the veil of time, not just a few centuries, but 9 millennia, landing right in the heart of what was, for its era, a truly bustling, vibrant, and utterly groundbreaking urban center, the ancient village of Ain Ghazal. Forget your quaint notions of isolated hunter-gatherer camps. This isn't just a handful of tents clustered around a water source. No, this is something altogether different. You step out into a small, enclosed courtyard, the ground beneath your bare feet surprisingly smooth, a testament to centuries of foot traffic and perhaps some intentional compacting. Around you rise walls of mud brick, some stacked neatly, others showing the characteristic erosion of ages, but all forming a coherent, interconnected labyrinth. This isn't just a village, it's a living, breathing organism of a settlement, a teeming network of homes, workshops, and communal spaces. It's like arriving in a miniature, extremely old, version of a city, only without the endless traffic jams or the incessant drone of air conditioning units. Though, to be fair, the ancient commute from one end of Ain Ghazal to the other probably involved fewer aggressive honks and more contemplative strolls. You push through a hide curtain, or maybe just step around a low wall, and suddenly, the sounds of Ain Ghazal truly wash over you. There's the low murmur of voices, a constant hum of activity. Children are laughing, their high-pitched squeals echoing off the mud brick walls as they chase each other through narrow alleyways, perhaps dodging a stray goat or two. You hear the rhythmic thud-thud-thud of someone pounding grain with a stone pestle, a sound that would have been the daily soundtrack of life here for generations. Interspersed are the sharper clink-clink of flint being knapped, the occasional bleating of a sheep, and the distant, almost musical call of someone shouting across a courtyard. It's a symphony of early human endeavor, a far cry from the quiet stillness of the desert you might have imagined. Look around you. This place is big. For its time, Ain Ghazal was truly immense. We're talking about a settlement that, at its peak, covered perhaps 10 to 15 hectares. That's roughly the size of 10 to 15 international rugby fields, or, for a more relatable scale, about 25 to 37 American football fields. Imagine that stretched out across the landscape, not as a sprawling suburb, but as a tightly packed, organically grown community. And the population? Well, historians still argue whether Ain Ghazal reached a population of 2,000 or even upwards of 3,000 people at its zenith around 7,000 BC. Either way, this makes it one of the largest, if not the largest, known Neolithic settlements in the entire Near East for a significant period. It was, in essence, the ancient equivalent of a booming regional hub, attracting people like a magnet, drawing them in with the promise of stability, community, and perhaps, a slightly less terrifying way to find dinner. As you wander deeper into the settlement, you begin to appreciate the sheer ingenuity involved in its construction. The houses aren't just haphazardly thrown together. They are often rectangular, multi-room structures, built with a surprising degree of planning. You notice walls that are incredibly thick, sometimes up to a meter wide, designed to keep the interiors cool in the scorching summer and warm in the chill of winter. Some homes even have plastered floors and walls, smoothed over with a fine lime plaster, which gleams faintly in the filtered sunlight. This wasn't just about aesthetics. Plastering the walls and floors helped to keep out pests and made the living spaces much cleaner. It was the ancient equivalent of deciding between carpet and hardwood floors, only with significantly more effort involved and probably a lot less debate about pet hair. You pass by open courtyards where families are engaged in daily chores. Women are grinding grain, preparing meals over small, contained fires, the smoke curling lazily upwards before dissipating into the bright sky. Men are mending tools, perhaps shaping a new flint blade, or tending to a small flock of sheep or goats penned in a nearby enclosure. Children, freed from the immediate demands of adult labor, tumble and play, their laughter a constant, joyful backdrop to the more serious work of survival. You might even catch a glimpse of someone meticulously weaving a basket from reeds or preparing animal hides for clothing, their hands moving with practiced efficiency honed over generations. The very air hums with a sense of purpose. This is a society that has embraced permanence. They are no longer chasing migrating herds across vast distances. Instead, they are rooted, bound to the land by their fields of domesticated wheat and barley, by their herds of sheep and goats, and by the very mud bricks of their homes. This shift from nomadic hunter-gatherer to settled farmer wasn't just an economic change, it was a profound transformation of the human experience. It meant more mouths to feed, yes, but it also meant the birth of specialized labor, the development of more complex social structures, and crucially for our story, the time and impetus for monumental artistic expression. You notice details that speak to a surprisingly advanced level of domestic comfort for the time. Some houses have hearths for cooking and warmth, strategically placed to vent smoke. Storage pits, often lined with plaster, are dug into the floors to keep grain and other provisions safe from pests and moisture. It's not exactly a smart home, but it's certainly not a cave. And the sheer consistency of their materials, the ubiquitous mud brick, means that generation after generation would have built, rebuilt, and expanded upon the same foundational principles. It's a testament to the fact that if it ain't broke, don't fix it, especially when it involves painstakingly molding thousands of sun-dried bricks. One of the quirky tidbits about Ain Ghazal, and indeed many early Neolithic sites, is the evidence of their diet. While they were farmers, they weren't entirely reliant on cultivated crops. Analysis of remains shows they still supplemented their diet with wild resources, hunting wild gazelle, for instance, and gathering wild fruits and nuts. So, while they had their ancient version of a pantry stocked with staples, they also enjoyed the occasional wild-caught protein, a kind of prehistoric farm-to-table movement with a side of opportunistic hunting. It's like having a well-stocked fridge, but still enjoying a good foraging trip for wild mushrooms on the weekend. As you stand amidst the quiet hum of this ancient metropolis, you realize that every wall, every path, every communal space here represents countless hours of collective effort. This wasn't built by a single visionary architect, but by generations of hands, working together, day after day, year after year. It's a testament to cooperation, to shared goals, and to a burgeoning sense of community that transcended the immediate family unit. They were building not just houses, but a society, brick by painstaking brick, or rather, mud lump by sun-dried mud lump. The sun begins to dip lower, casting long shadows across the courtyards. The air cools slightly, and the sounds of the village begin to shift. The boisterous play of children gives way to the more subdued chatter of adults gathering for communal meals. The smell of cooking fires intensifies, promising warmth and sustenance. You feel a profound sense of connection to these distant ancestors, not just as abstract figures in a history book, but as living, breathing people who built a complex, thriving world from the ground up. And it's within this vibrant, settled world born from the very earth beneath your feet that the seeds of something truly extraordinary, something deeply spiritual and artistic, began to take root. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the imagined dust of the construction site settle, and you open them again to a different kind of quiet. Not the hum of machinery, but the rustle of dry grasses underfoot, the distant bleat of an animal, the murmur of human voices, a soundscape utterly alien to our modern ears, yet profoundly familiar in its essence of life. You're no longer a casual observer, you're an inhabitant of this distant past, experiencing the monumental, slow-motion shift that reshaped human existence. Forget your ergonomic office chair. Your daily commute used to involve, well, all the walking. Every single day. Forever. For countless millennia, Your ancestors had lived as hunter-gatherers, a lifestyle dictated by the rhythm of the seasons and the migratory patterns of animals. You would have been part of a small, mobile band, maybe 20 or 30 souls, always on the move, always attuned to the subtle whispers of the land. You'd know where the best flint could be found, when the wild figs would ripen, which river crossing the gazelles preferred. Your home was wherever you laid your head, a temporary shelter of hides and branches, quickly erected, just as quickly abandoned. Your possessions were few, light enough to carry on your back, because anything more would literally weigh you down. Imagine trying to move your entire apartment every week. No, thank you. You'd be exceptionally good at packing, though. Life was a constant, intricate dance with nature. You'd stalk wary prey with an almost supernatural patience, your senses finely honed. You'd gather wild grains, berries, and roots, knowing precisely which ones were edible and which were best avoided, often with unpleasant consequences if you guessed wrong. It was a life of profound physical challenge, but also one of deep connection to the environment, a constant improvisation. There was no concept of a 5-day work week or retirement plans. Every day was a work day, and every day was about immediate survival. It's almost like they invented the original work from home setup, except home was always changing. But then, something began to shift. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic declaration, no ancient council meeting where someone pounded a fist on a rock and announced, "Right, lads, no more chasing mammoths. We're doing agriculture now." Oh, if only it were that simple. Instead, it was a gradual, almost imperceptible evolution, driven by a complex interplay of environmental changes, population pressures, and perhaps, just plain old human curiosity. The mainstream historical fact here is that this period, roughly beginning around 10,000 BC in the Fertile Crescent, is known as the Neolithic Revolution. It marked humanity's pivot from a nomadic, foraging existence to one rooted in settled farming. Think of it as the original pivot to video. But instead of video, it was, food. You start to notice things. Certain wild grasses, like emmer wheat and barley, grow abundantly in particular areas. Perhaps you or a clever ancestor accidentally scattered some seeds near a seasonal camp, and returned months later to find a denser patch. Or maybe, as a quirky or fringe tidbit suggests, the initial domestication of grains wasn't primarily for bread, but for brewing early forms of beer. Imagine, the world's first farmers might have been motivated by a desire for a reliable supply of fermented beverages, rather than just sustenance. This chasing after antelope is exhausting. What if we just grew our own happy hour? A truly revolutionary thought, if you asked me. Whatever the spark, the idea takes root, quite literally. You begin to observe, to experiment. You learn the rhythm of the plants, when to sow, when to water, when to harvest. It's backbreaking work, a constant battle against weeds, pests, and the unpredictable whims of weather. You're tilling the soil with rudimentary tools, perhaps just a digging stick, your hands calloused, your back aching. The harvest, when it comes, is a triumph, but it also brings a new set of challenges. Where do you put all this grain? You can't just carry it around anymore. This is where the concept of a permanent home truly begins to solidify. If you're investing all this effort into cultivation, you need to be nearby to protect your crops, to store your surplus. So you start building. Not temporary shelters, but something more substantial. Mud brick walls, stone foundations, roofs that can withstand the elements. You're literally putting down roots, sinking your efforts, your hopes, your very being, into a specific patch of earth. The smell of sun-baked mud and fresh timber fills the air. You're not just building a house, you're building a future. And let me tell you, the ancient equivalent of home renovation was not for the faint of heart. No HGTV back then, just grit and a lot of elbow grease. This embrace of agriculture and permanent homes triggered a profound societal shift. Suddenly, your small, mobile band starts to grow. A reliable food source can support more people, leading to larger, denser settlements. Ain Ghazal, as we discussed, became a burgeoning metropolis of its time, a far cry from a nomadic encampment. With more people in one place, new social structures emerge. No longer is everyone equally involved in hunting or gathering. There's a division of labor. Some specialize in farming, others in toolmaking, perhaps some in building, or even, as we'll see, in creating art. This shift wasn't without its downsides. Your diet, while more reliable, became less diverse. Instead of a wide array of wild plants and animals, you're primarily relying on a few staple crops. This can lead to nutritional deficiencies. Living in closer proximity also means disease can spread more easily. Imagine the ancient equivalent of a flu season, but without modern medicine. Yikes. Historians still argue whether the shift to agriculture was a net positive or negative for human health and well-being. Was it the dawn of civilization, or the beginning of a long decline in physical robustness? It's a debate that echoes in the quiet corners of archaeological digs, long after the dust of millennia has settled. But with these challenges came incredible opportunities. The surplus food meant not everyone had to spend all their time foraging. This freed up time for other pursuits, innovation, craftsmanship, and yes, eventually, monumental art. You start to see the beginnings of communal projects, requiring coordination and leadership. Imagine organizing dozens, maybe hundreds, of people to build a complex dwelling or dig an irrigation ditch. It required a new level of social cohesion, a shared vision for the future. You're no longer just surviving, you're planning, you're investing, you're building a community that transcends your immediate family unit. The very concept of time changes. No longer are you living day to day, moment to moment. You're thinking seasonally, annually. You're preparing for next year's harvest, storing food, planning for the lean months. This forward-thinking mentality is a radical departure, laying the groundwork for complex economies and long-term planning. You're essentially developing the first ancient business plan, complete with inventory management and seasonal projections. Except your inventory might just be a pile of grain in a pit, and your projections are based on a gut feeling about the weather. The landscape around you transforms too. Where once there was wild, untamed nature, now you see cultivated fields, cleared land, perhaps even early forms of irrigation. You're actively shaping your environment, rather than merely adapting to it. This new relationship with the land brings a sense of ownership, of belonging. This plot of land is yours, or rather, ours, the community's. And with that sense of ownership comes new forms of social organization, new rules, and inevitably, new conflicts over resources. Who owns the best field? Who controls the water source? These are the burgeoning seeds of social hierarchy and, dare I say, the world's first property disputes. Excuse me, but that's my patch of wild barley. I saw it first. This profound societal shift, from the endless wandering of nomads to the rooted stability of settlers, was the crucible in which new forms of human expression and belief would be forged. It was a time of immense change, of both struggle and ingenuity, laying the foundation for everything that came after. And it's within this context, this quiet revolution of daily life, that the extraordinary creations of Ain Ghazal begin to make a little more sense. The very act of settling down, of building permanent homes and cultivating the land, fostered a need for something more than just survival. It fostered a need for meaning, for identity, for connection to something larger than themselves. And that, dear listener, is where our story truly begins to take shape. You've traded the endless horizon for a more defined world, haven't you? Your feet, once restless wanderers, now know the comforting, familiar paths between your dwelling and the communal threshing floor. The vast, unpredictable wilderness, once your entire existence, has shrunk, replaced by the reassuring hum of a settled village. And as your physical world contracts, something remarkable happens. Your inner world begins to expand. No longer are your days solely consumed by the immediate, desperate hunt for survival. There's a newfound stability, a collective breath held, and then exhaled, slowly. And in that exhale, you find space for something profound, contemplation. Imagine it. You're sitting by the hearth, the flickering firelight dancing on the faces of your kin. The crops are in, the granaries are full, for now, and the immediate threat of starvation has receded a bit. For the first time, perhaps, you have the mental bandwidth to truly wonder. Why did the rains come this year, but not the last? What makes the seeds sprout? Where does the sun go when it dips below the horizon, and why does it always return? You're no longer just observing the world, you're trying to understand its underlying mechanics, its secrets, its very soul. It's like discovering the internet after living in a cave. Suddenly, all these questions you didn't even know you had are bubbling to the surface, demanding answers. Except, without the cat videos. Or the endless scrolling. Mostly. This isn't just curiosity, it's the genesis of a spiritual awakening, a profound shift in human consciousness. When you're constantly on the move, your connection to the land is transient, pragmatic. But now, the land is your land. It feeds you, shelters you, holds the bones of your ancestors. The very earth beneath your feet becomes imbued with meaning, with power. You start to see patterns, not just in the seasons, but in life and death, in abundance and scarcity. And these patterns begin to coalesce into something more than just random occurrences. They become the whispers of something larger, something beyond your immediate grasp, a force, a spirit, perhaps even a deity. This newfound stability also means that your dead are no longer left behind on a long journey. They are buried here, right within the village, sometimes even beneath the very floors of your homes. This creates an intimate, ever-present connection to those who came before. Your ancestors aren't just figures in a fading memory, their spirits linger, intertwined with the soil and the stones of your settlement. You might feel their presence, their watchful eyes, their guiding hands. It's a bit like having extremely quiet, very ancient, and possibly judgmental roommates. You can't see them, but you know they're there, and you probably tried to keep the place tidy, just in case. This deep reverence for ancestors, their wisdom, and their continued influence, becomes a cornerstone of your burgeoning belief system. In fact, elsewhere in the Neolithic world, some of your contemporaries might even be carefully removing the skulls of their deceased, plastering them, and painting them to recreate their faces, keeping them as tangible effigies of their revered forebears. It's a practice that speaks volumes about the enduring connection to the dead. As these beliefs solidify, they become communal. It's no longer just your personal musings, it's our shared understanding. And shared understandings demand shared expressions. How do you communicate these complex, abstract ideas to your children, to your neighbors, to the generations yet to come? You tell stories, of course, around that same flickering hearth. You perform rituals, perhaps at specific times of the year, when the crops are sown, when they are harvested, when the rains arrive. These aren't just practical activities anymore, they are imbued with sacred meaning, designed to honor the forces that govern your world and ensure your continued prosperity. It's the original community outreach program, but instead of brochures, you have elaborate ceremonies and a profound sense of shared purpose. This is where the new forms of expression truly blossom. Before writing, before complex written theology, how do you give form to the formless? How do you make the invisible visible? You create. You don't just tell the story of the harvest spirit, you embody it. You don't just speak of your ancestors, you make their presence tangible. This desire, this need, to give physical manifestation to abstract beliefs, to spiritual entities, to revered ancestors, becomes an incredibly powerful societal drive. It's not just about art for art's sake, though there's certainly beauty in what emerges. It's about channeling the collective spiritual energy of an entire community into something concrete, something that can be seen, touched, perhaps even worshipped. Historians still argue whether these early spiritual practices were a fully formed polytheism, a continuation of animistic beliefs, or primarily a sophisticated form of ancestor veneration. The truth, you might ponder, is probably a complex tapestry woven from all these threads. You're not adhering to a strict dogma laid out in a sacred text, you're living it, feeling it, shaping it with every sunrise and sunset, every planting and harvest. Your beliefs are fluid, evolving, deeply intertwined with the rhythms of your settled life. The success of your crops, the health of your children, the very survival of your community, all of it feels inextricably linked to your relationship with these unseen forces, these powerful spirits, these ever-present ancestors. So, as you step back from the bustling activity of the village, you see something more profound than just mud brick houses and fields of grain. You see the nascent stirrings of organized spirituality. You see the human mind, freed from the immediate tyranny of survival, reaching out, grasping for meaning, for connection to the cosmic forces that shape its destiny. And you see the incredible impulse to translate these ethereal concepts into something real, something touchable, something that anchors the invisible in the visible world. It's an internal revolution, a blossoming of the soul, and it sets the stage for creations that will echo through millennia. Now settle in, because this is where things get really wild, in a quiet, dusty, chemical reaction kind of way. You know how sometimes you look at something incredibly ancient, something that defies easy explanation, and you just think, how did they do that? Well, prepare to have your mind gently blown by the prehistoric chemists of Ain Ghazal. We're about to delve into the surprising ingenuity involved in creating these durable sculptures, not from exotic materials, but from humble, everyday limestone. It's like discovering your great-great-great-grandparents invented superglue using only dirt and spit. Imagine, if you will, the world around you in Ain Ghazal. You're not just living in a hut, you're part of a community that's suddenly decided, you know what? We need to make a bunch of plaster people. And not just any plaster, but something that would last for millennia, something strong enough to survive being buried, then unearthed by a bunch of confused archaeologists thousands of years later. This wasn't some casual DIY project you saw on a TikTok tutorial. This was serious, industrial-level chemistry, without the safety goggles or the lab coats. So, where do you start? With limestone, of course. It's everywhere. You trudge out, probably with some friends, to the nearest exposed rock face or riverbed. You're not just picking up pebbles, you're gathering substantial chunks of calcium carbonate. Think about the sheer muscle power involved. No heavy machinery, no excavators. Just human strength, perhaps some basic tools, and a whole lot of grit. You're hauling these rocks back to the village, probably grumbling about your aching back, dreaming of a future where things like delivery services exist. This isn't exactly a Netflix binge, is it? More like a very intense, very dusty gym session, but without the motivational music. Once you've got your pile of limestone, and we're talking a big pile, enough for dozens of life-size figures, the real magic, or rather, the real science, begins. You need to transform this inert rock into something workable, something that can be molded. And for that you need fire. Lots and lots of fire. You're building a kiln. Not a fancy, temperature-controlled electric kiln like a modern potter might use, but a rudimentary structure. Perhaps a pit dug into the earth, lined with stones, or a simple dome-shaped oven built from mud bricks. The goal is to create an enclosed space where you can get the temperature really high. We're talking upwards of 800 to 1000 degrees Celsius. That's about 1472 to 1832 degrees Fahrenheit for those of you keeping score in Fahrenheit. You feed the kiln with wood constantly for days on end. Imagine the smoke, the heat radiating from the structure, the flickering orange glow against the night sky. It's a colossal undertaking, a perpetual bonfire that never seems to end. You're essentially baking rocks. And what happens when you bake limestone at these extreme temperatures? It undergoes a process called calcination. The carbon dioxide within the limestone is driven off, leaving behind a highly reactive substance known as quicklime, or calcium oxide. This is your first major transformation. It's like turning a solid block of ice into steam, same basic stuff, wildly different properties. Now, quicklime is fascinating, but also a bit feisty. If you've ever seen a modern construction worker handle it, you know it needs respect. It's highly caustic and reactive. If you add water to it, it doesn't just get wet, it literally boils and generates immense heat. This is the slaking process. You take your chunks of quicklime, now lighter and more porous than their original limestone form, and carefully, slowly, you add water. There's a hiss, a cloud of steam, and then a vigorous bubbling. The quicklime slakes, breaking down into a fine, white powder or a creamy paste known as slaked lime, or calcium hydroxide. It's a bit like watching a tiny volcano erupt in a bucket, but instead of lava, you get this incredibly fine, incredibly useful material. This is where the ancient chemists truly shone, understanding this powerful, exothermic reaction without any formal scientific training. Historians still argue whether this knowledge was stumbled upon accidentally through generations of careful experimentation, perhaps while firing pottery, or if it was a deliberate, long sought-after innovation. Either way, it was a game-changer. This slaked lime paste is the foundation of your plaster. But it's not quite ready for sculpting yet. Just like baking a cake, you need a few more ingredients to get the right consistency and strength. The artisans of Ain Ghazal would mix this lime paste with various aggregates. Fine sand was a common choice, adding bulk and strength, preventing excessive shrinkage as it dried. But sometimes, they'd get creative. You might find traces of ash, perhaps even crushed bone, or tiny bits of charcoal. These weren't just random additions. They often served a purpose, either as a filler, to improve workability, or to add subtle properties to the finished product. It's a bit like adding a secret ingredient to your grandmother's famous cookie recipe. It just makes it better. Once mixed to the perfect consistency, a smooth, pliable paste that was wet enough to shape but stiff enough to hold its form, it was ready for the sculptors. This plaster had a remarkable quality. It would slowly absorb carbon dioxide from the air, gradually hardening back into a form of calcium carbonate, essentially turning back into a kind of artificial stone. This slow carbonation process is what gives lime plaster its incredible durability over time. It's not just drying, it's chemically transforming, becoming incredibly robust. This is a mainstream historical fact. Lime plaster and lime-based concrete were pivotal materials for construction and art across many ancient civilizations, from the Egyptians to the Romans, long before modern cements. The fact that Ain Ghazal's inhabitants mastered this so early, and on such a scale, is truly astonishing. Think about the skill involved here. You're not just mixing cement from a bag. You're starting with raw rock, transforming it through fire, then through a violent chemical reaction with water, and then carefully mixing it to a precise consistency. If you got the temperature wrong in the kiln, your quicklime wouldn't form properly. If you added water too quickly to the quicklime, you could injure yourself or ruin the batch. If your mixture was too wet, it would slump, too dry, it would crumble. It was a delicate dance of chemistry and craftsmanship. The ancient people of Ain Ghazal weren't just artists. They were engineers, chemists, and material scientists, all rolled into one, figuring out complex processes through generations of trial and error. They were the original DIY experts, but instead of building a wobbly bookshelf, they were creating masterpieces that would outlast empires. And the result? A remarkably strong, durable, and surprisingly smooth material that could be molded, shaped, and then allowed to set, creating figures that truly stood the test of time. This mastery of plaster wasn't just a clever trick. It was a foundational technology that allowed them to express their burgeoning cultural and spiritual beliefs in a way that had never been seen before. They took a simple rock and, through a series of ingenious transformations, gave it a new life, a new purpose, a new voice that would whisper across the millennia. You know, when you think about ancient art, your mind probably conjures up images of chisel-wielding sculptors, dust flying, the rhythmic clink-clank-clink against stone. Or perhaps painters, brushes swishing, vibrant pigments splashed across cave walls. But here, in the quiet, bustling heart of Neolithic Ain Ghazal, you're not hearing the clang of metal or the splash of paint. Instead, what envelopes you is a profound, almost reverent hush, punctuated only by the soft squish of wet earth, the gentle scrape of a bone tool, and the focused breathing of dedicated hands. This is the workshop, not of noisy stone masons, but of the plaster artisans, and it's a masterclass in patience. Imagine stepping into one of these designated spaces, perhaps a semi-enclosed area, sheltered from the elements but open enough for the air to circulate. The ground beneath your bare feet is packed earth, slightly damp, smelling faintly of minerals and a subtle, earthy sweetness. You see the setup, shallow pits where the precious lime plaster, derived from heated limestone and then slaked with water, is being carefully mixed. It's not like whipping up a batch of instant mashed potatoes. This is a delicate dance. Too much water, and it's soup, useless for sculpting. Too little, and it's a crumbly mess. The consistency has to be just right, like a thick, smooth dough, ready to be coaxed into form before it begins its inexorable journey to hardness. And let me tell you, working with this stuff is a race against time. Once that water hits the slaked lime, you're on the clock. It's like trying to build a sandcastle when the tide is coming in, but instead of the tide, it's the plaster itself, setting faster than your last-minute online order ships. The artisans, their hands already dusted with the fine white powder, work with an almost meditative focus. They're not using fancy tools forged in blazing furnaces. No, their implements are humble, sharpened pieces of bone, perhaps smooth river stones, once mixed to the perfect consistency, a smooth, pliable paste that was wet enough to shape but stiff enough to hold its form. It was ready for the sculptors. This plaster had a remarkable quality. It would slowly absorb carbon dioxide from the air, gradually hardening back into a form of calcium carbonate, essentially turning back into a kind of artificial stone. This slow carbonation process is what gives lime plaster its incredible durability over time. It's not just drying, it's chemically transforming, becoming incredibly robust. This is a mainstream historical fact. Lime plaster and lime-based concrete were pivotal materials for construction and art across many ancient civilizations, from the Egyptians to the Romans, long before modern cements. The fact that Ain Ghazal's inhabitants mastered this so early, and on such a scale, is truly astonishing. Think about the skill involved here. You're not just mixing cement from a bag. You're starting with raw rock, transforming it through fire, then through a violent chemical reaction with water, and then carefully mixing it to a precise consistency. If you got the temperature wrong in the kiln, your quicklime wouldn't form properly. If you added water too quickly to the quicklime, you could injure yourself or ruin the batch. If your mixture was too wet, it would slump, too dry, it would crumble. It was a delicate dance of chemistry and craftsmanship. The ancient people of Ain Ghazal weren't just artists. They were engineers, chemists, and material scientists, all rolled into one, figuring out complex processes through generations of trial and error. They were the original DIY experts, but instead of building a wobbly bookshelf, they were creating masterpieces that would outlast empires. And the result? A remarkably strong, durable, and surprisingly smooth material that could be molded, shaped, and then allowed to set, creating figures that truly stood the test of time. This mastery of plaster wasn't just a clever trick. It was a foundational technology that allowed them to express their burgeoning cultural and spiritual beliefs in a way that had never been seen before. They took a simple rock and, through a series of ingenious transformations, gave it a new life, a new purpose, a new voice that would whisper across the millennia. You know, when you think about ancient art, your mind probably conjures up images of chisel-wielding sculptors, dust flying, the rhythmic clink-clank-clink against stone. Or perhaps painters, brushes swishing, vibrant pigments splashed across cave walls. But here, in the quiet, bustling heart of Neolithic Ain Ghazal, you're not hearing the clang of metal or the splash of paint. Instead, what envelopes you is a profound, almost reverent hush, punctuated only by the soft squish of wet earth, the gentle scrape of a bone tool, and the focused breathing of dedicated hands. This is the workshop, not of noisy stone masons, but of the plaster artisans, and it's a masterclass in patience. Imagine stepping into one of these designated spaces, perhaps a semi-enclosed area, sheltered from the elements but open enough for the air to circulate. The ground beneath your bare feet is packed earth, slightly damp, smelling faintly of minerals and a subtle, earthy sweetness. You see the setup, shallow pits where the precious lime plaster, derived from heated limestone and then slaked with water, is being carefully mixed. It's not like whipping up a batch of instant mashed potatoes. This is a delicate dance. Too much water, and it's soup, useless for sculpting. Too little, and it's a crumbly mess. The consistency has to be just right, like a thick, smooth dough, ready to be coaxed into form before it begins its inexorable journey to hardness. And let me tell you, working with this stuff is a race against time. Once that water hits the slaked lime, you're on the clock. It's like trying to build a sandcastle when the tide is coming in, but instead of the tide, it's the plaster itself, setting faster than your last-minute online order ships. The artisans, their hands already dusted with the fine white powder, work with an almost meditative focus. They're not using fancy tools forged in blazing furnaces. No, their implements are humble, sharpened pieces of bone, perhaps smooth river stones, sticks, and their own incredibly skilled fingers. You watch as a core form begins to take shape. It's not solid plaster all the way through. That would be incredibly heavy, prone to cracking, and a monumental waste of precious material. Instead, they start with a bundled armature, often made from reeds or grasses, sometimes even twigs. Think of it as the prehistoric equivalent of rebar in concrete, providing internal structure and reducing the amount of plaster needed. They meticulously bind these bundles with twine made from plant fibers, creating a rough skeletal shape, a torso here, a limb there. It's a bit like building a very fragile, stick-figure doll, only this one is destined for greatness, or at least, for a very long nap underground. Once the armature is ready, the real plaster work begins. They apply the first layers, thick and even, pressing the wet plaster onto the reed core. You can almost feel the cool, smooth paste squishing between their fingers. This initial layer is about bulk, about establishing the basic volumetric shape. They work quickly, but with immense control, smoothing out lumps, pushing the material into the desired contours. It's not about speed, but about efficiency. Every movement is deliberate, practiced, honed over countless hours of dedicated craft. Imagine trying to sculpt a detailed figure from clay, but the clay is constantly firming up on you. That's the kind of pressure these folks were under. No breaks for a snack, no checking your social media. Just pure, unadulterated focus. As the initial layers begin to stiffen, but before they're fully hardened, the artisans move on to refining the form. This is where the meticulous part truly shines. They use their bone tools, sometimes just a sharpened splinter, to carve and scrape away excess material, to define the subtle curves of a shoulder, the gentle swell of a chest, or the delicate tapering of a limb. They're not just adding, they're also subtracting, shaping the plaster as if it were soft stone. You see them carefully working around the areas where facial features will emerge, or where fingers and toes will be subtly indicated. It's a slow, iterative process, each stroke building upon the last, each decision impacting the final appearance. One of the most remarkable aspects of these statues, which you'll notice when you get a closer look, is the distinctive rendering of the eyes. They're often very large, wide open, and sometimes adorned with bitumen, a natural asphalt, for the pupils. Sculpting these must have been incredibly challenging. They weren't just painting circles on a flat surface. They were creating a three-dimensional effect, often by applying a small lump of plaster, shaping it into an almond or circular form, and then carefully hollowing out the center or building up a rim. It would be like trying to sculpt a tiny, perfect egg from Play-Doh, but with the added pressure of it being for a sacred purpose and hardening by the second. Historians still argue whether the exaggerated eyes were meant to signify heightened awareness, a connection to the spiritual realm, or simply a stylistic choice common to the period. Whatever the reason, they certainly make an impression. The detail work extends to other features too. The nose, often prominent and straight. The mouth, frequently a small, closed slit, giving the figures a serene, almost inscrutable expression. You might even see subtle indications of ears, or a rudimentary hairline. For the bodies, they aren't anatomically precise in a modern sense. They are stylized, elongated, almost columnar, but with just enough suggestion of human form to be recognizable. Perhaps a gentle curve for the belly, a slight indentation for the navel. Mainstream historical fact: the use of lime plaster for sculpture and building was a significant technological advancement in the Neolithic Near East, predating its widespread use in many other parts of the world by millennia. This wasn't just a local fad, it was a cornerstone of early complex societies. Once the main sculpting is complete, the figures enter a critical phase, drying. This isn't something you can rush with a hairdryer. These are substantial pieces, and if they dry too quickly, or unevenly, they will crack and crumble. So, The artisans would carefully move the newly formed statues to a shaded, well-ventilated area, perhaps covered with damp cloths to control the rate of evaporation. It would take days, maybe even weeks, for them to fully harden, gradually transforming from a soft, malleable paste into a surprisingly durable, stone-like material. Imagine the suspense, waiting to see if all that painstaking work would survive the drying process intact. It's like baking a cake, but instead of worrying if it will rise, you're worried if it will spontaneously explode. And here's a quirky tidbit for you. Some of these statues show evidence of being repaired in antiquity. Cracks were filled, broken pieces reattached with fresh plaster. This suggests that these weren't just disposable items. They were objects of immense value, cared for and maintained, perhaps even living with the community for an extended period before their eventual, ritualistic burial. It's a testament to their significance that someone took the time to patch them up, rather than just starting fresh. It's like finding out your ancient ancestors were also into DIY repairs, probably with less YouTube tutorials to guide them. So, as the quiet hum of activity continues in the Ain Ghazal workshop, you get a profound sense of the dedication involved. These weren't just skilled craftspeople. They were likely individuals deeply immersed in the community's spiritual life, their hands giving form to beliefs, to ancestors, to the very essence of their settled existence. They worked in silence, not just because it was efficient, but perhaps because the creation itself was a form of reverence, a quiet prayer made manifest in plaster. It's a far cry from the noisy, bustling construction site where they were found, isn't it? You drift now, your mind's eye still hovering over the ancient village of Ain Ghazal, a place where the air hums not with the drone of modern machinery, but with the quiet, persistent rhythm of human endeavor. You've seen the ingenuity, the mastery of plaster, the patient hands at work. But what you're about to grasp, what truly sets Ain Ghazal apart, is not just the skill, but the sheer, mind-boggling scale of their artistic output. Imagine for a moment, if you will, a factory floor. Not one with robots and conveyor belts, but one cobbled together from sun-baked earth and simple tools, powered entirely by human muscle and communal will. This isn't a small workshop producing a few bespoke pieces for a wealthy patron. Oh no, my friend. This is an operation that suggests a demand, a societal imperative, so profound it beggars belief. You don't just stumble upon a couple of plaster figures at Ain Ghazal. You encounter, in archaeological terms, a veritable legion of them. Think of it, dozens upon dozens of these figures, ranging from life-sized human representations to smaller busts, all meticulously crafted from that same humble, yet surprisingly resilient, lime plaster. It's like discovering that the ancient Egyptians didn't just build a few pyramids, but decided to erect a whole mountain range of them, each one painstakingly carved by hand. You start to understand that this wasn't an artistic whim, a leisurely pursuit for a few bored individuals. This was a sustained collective effort, an industrial-scale art project undertaken by people who had no concept of industry, as we know it. You close your eyes and picture the scene, not just one artisan, but perhaps teams of them. You can almost hear the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of pestles grinding limestone into fine powder, the dry dust tickling your nose even across millennia. Then, the hiss and steam as the powdered lime is mixed with water, slaked, as they call it, in large pits or vessels. It's a process that generates heat, a strange, alchemical transformation of rock into a pliable paste. Imagine the air thick with the smell of lime, a faint, mineral tang, as groups of workers, their hands strong and calloused, knead and mix the plaster. It's an endless, repetitive task, far from glamorous, but utterly essential. Then comes the armature, the skeleton of reeds and twigs that gives the figures their initial form. You visualize others, perhaps the younger ones or those with nimbler fingers, meticulously weaving and binding these natural materials into rough human shapes. It's like a prehistoric version of a DIY store, except instead of PVC pipes, you're gathering river reeds and sturdy branches. And let's be honest, health and safety regulations were probably a bit more relaxed back then. No hard hats, no high-vis vests, just a lot of elbow grease and a healthy fear of dropping a heavy bucket of wet plaster on your foot. As the plaster is ready, still warm and pliable, it's quickly applied to these armatures. You see the hands, not just one pair, but many, working in tandem. Some spread the plaster thickly, building up the torso and limbs. Others, perhaps the more skilled, focus on the delicate details of the faces, smoothing the surfaces, shaping the prominent noses and those striking, wide-open eyes. It's a race against time, as the plaster begins to set surprisingly quickly. There's no room for hesitation, no time for second-guessing. Each movement is deliberate, practiced, honed over countless repetitions. You can almost feel the texture of the wet plaster under your own phantom fingers, cool, then warming as it sets, slightly gritty, yet capable of remarkable smoothness when worked just right. And as each figure takes shape, it's carefully moved to a designated drying area. Imagine rows upon rows of these emerging plaster people, laid out in the sun, slowly hardening, transforming from soft clay-like forms into solid, durable effigies. It's like a silent, growing army, a population explosion of the inanimate kind. This wasn't a one-off artistic splurge. This was a sustained commitment, spanning generations. The sheer volume of statues found suggests that their creation wasn't a sporadic event but a continuous process, deeply embedded in the societal fabric of Ain Ghazal. Mainstream historical consensus points to the fact that Ain Ghazal was one of the largest and most significant Neolithic settlements in the Near East, boasting a population that might have reached 3,000 people at its peak. To sustain such a population, and simultaneously produce such a massive artistic output, speaks volumes about their organizational capabilities and the stability of their community. You start to ponder the logistics. Where did all that limestone come from? It wasn't just lying around in convenient piles. Someone had to find it, quarry it, transport it back to the village. And water, essential for slaking the lime and mixing the plaster, in a region that, while not a desert, certainly wasn't overflowing with. This exaggerated ocular emphasis isn't just a stylistic quirk, it's a profound statement. In many ancient cultures, and certainly in the Near East, the eyes were considered the windows to the soul, the most expressive part of the human face, and a direct conduit to the divine or spiritual realm. Think of the Sumerian votive statues from slightly later periods, for instance. They too feature strikingly large, often inlaid eyes, designed to maintain an eternal, prayerful gaze towards the gods. It's a mainstream historical fact that across the ancient world, from Mesopotamia to Egypt, artists often amplified the eyes to convey alertness, reverence, or a connection to the transcendent. So, while these Ain Ghazal figures predate many of those more famous examples, you're seeing the very early stirrings of a widespread artistic convention, a silent testament to the power of the gaze. As you lean in closer, you notice the incredible detail within the shells themselves, the subtle iridescence, the way they catch the faint light, making the figures seem almost alive, or at least, uncannily present. It's as if the artisans wanted to ensure that even in the darkest, most sacred spaces, these figures would appear to be watching, absorbing, perhaps even communicating in a language beyond words. There's a quirky tidbit here. Some researchers have actually proposed that the large, staring eyes might have been designed to reflect flickering lamplight or firelight in dark chambers, creating an illusion of movement or life. Picture it, the subtle dance of shadows and light across those vast, shell-encrusted eyes, making them seem to blink, to shift, to truly see. It's a clever bit of prehistoric special effects, if you asked me, like a really low-tech, high-impact jump scare for the Neolithic era. Moving up from the eyes, you trace the contours of their faces. The heads are generally elongated, almost oval, with a distinct flattening at the back. Noses are prominent, often long and narrow, sometimes almost beak-like. But then you notice something else, something equally striking in its absence: mouths. Most of these figures lack any indication of a mouth, or at best, they have a tiny, almost imperceptible slit. No lips, no grins, no frowns, no hint of speech. They are eternally silent, their stories contained entirely within their gaze. Historians still argue whether this lack of a mouth signifies reverence, an emphasis on listening rather than speaking, or if it was simply a practical limitation of the plaster medium, which might have made intricate mouth details difficult to achieve. Perhaps they just didn't want to accidentally sculpt a permanent resting grumpy face. Who knows? It adds to their enigmatic aura, doesn't it? They're like the ultimate poker players, giving absolutely nothing away. Now let your gaze drift down from those captivating faces to the bodies. And here's where the stylized part really comes into play. If you were hoping for anatomically perfect representations, you might be a little disappointed. These aren't the Greek ideal of the human form, nor are they the hyperrealistic sculptures of later periods. Instead, the bodies are generally flat, almost plank-like, with a remarkable lack of detailed musculature or bone structure. They possess a certain columnar rigidity, like silent sentinels standing at attention for eternity. You'll notice that some figures are clearly identifiable as female, with gentle swelling indicating breasts, while others appear to be male or undifferentiated. But even these features are rendered in a simplified, abstract manner. The arms, if present, are often mere stubs or suggestions, held close to the body, contributing to that overall sense of stillness. Legs are usually fused together, forming a solid base, making it clear these figures were never meant to walk or move. They are static, rooted, almost architectural in their form. It's as if the artists were saying, "We're not trying to fool anyone into thinking these are real people. We're showing you the essence of a person, a symbolic representation, not a snapshot." If they were going for realism, they might have needed a few more anatomy classes. But hey, it was the Neolithic, resources were tight, and art school probably wasn't accredited yet. The stylization isn't just about simplification, it's about emphasis. By de-emphasizing naturalistic anatomy, the artists drew your attention back to what truly mattered: the towering presence, the unblinking eyes, the silent power. It creates a powerful, almost spiritual effect. You're not looking at a person, you're looking at a concept of a person, elevated and transformed. It's a bit like modern minimalist art, where less is often intended to convey more. Only these artists were doing it thousands of years before anyone coined the term minimalism. They were just quietly getting on with it, creating profound statements with humble materials. Some of these figures are full-bodied, standing tall, perhaps up to a meter in height, while others are busts, just heads and shoulders, often with two heads on a single body, creating a fascinating, almost unsettling duality. Imagine encountering a two-headed statue in the dim light of an ancient dwelling. It's not a monstrous image, but rather one that evokes a sense of connection, perhaps representing twins, or ancestors, or different aspects of a single spiritual entity. It adds another layer to their already complex and mysterious appearance. As you slowly circle one of these figures, your fingers itching to trace the subtle curves and flattened planes, but don't, please, conservation is key. You begin to appreciate the sheer artistry involved in making something so seemingly simple, yet so profoundly impactful. The plaster surfaces, though now often worn and discolored, would once have been smooth, perhaps even polished, catching the light in a different way. You can almost feel the cool, dry texture under your fingertips, imagining the fresh, pliable plaster slowly hardening under the careful hands of the ancient craftspeople. They don't scream for attention with flashy colors or intricate patterns, though some traces of red ochre pigment have been found, suggesting they might have once been painted, perhaps to highlight features or add symbolic meaning. But even without vibrant hues, their forms speak volumes. They are solemn, dignified, and possess an undeniable gravitas. You find yourself drawn into their silent world, a world where the human form was not just a physical vessel, but a canvas for profound spiritual and societal meaning. And as you stand there, bathed in the soft, imaginary glow of the past, you realize these aren't just old statues. They are ancient mirrors, reflecting the very soul of a people who lived, believed, and created in a time almost beyond our comprehension. They're giving you that look you know, the one your grandma gives you when you haven't called in a while. Only these guys have been waiting a lot longer. You stand before them, these plaster people, their gazes fixed on something beyond your perception, and a question begins to form in the quiet corners of your mind, a question that has puzzled archaeologists and historians for decades. Who exactly are you looking at? Are these solemn figures revered ancestors, brought back from the veil of memory to watch over their descendants? Or are they powerful deities, nascent gods and goddesses of a world still finding its spiritual footing? Or, perhaps, are they some intriguing, indefinable blend of both, a spiritual smoothie of the past? You ponder the first possibility, that these are ancestors. Imagine, for a moment, the world of Ain Ghazal. A community burgeoning, growing, spreading its roots deeper into the fertile soil. In such a world, lineage matters. Who came before you? Who cleared the land, built the first homes, passed on the knowledge of the seasons and the secrets of the soil? The memory of these foundational figures, these brave pioneers of permanence, would be incredibly potent. Perhaps these statues were commissioned as a tangible link to those who had passed on, a way to keep their presence alive, their wisdom accessible. You can almost picture families gathering around a particularly striking figure, recounting tales of a great-great-grandmother who tamed the wild wheat, or a revered chieftain who negotiated peace with a neighboring tribe. It's like having a very, very old family photo on display, but instead of fading sepia, it's vibrant plaster, imbued with the weight of generations. Though, let's be honest, if your family reunion involved a life-sized, unblinking plaster effigy of Great Aunt Mildred, things might get a little weird. Yes, children, she's still watching you from the mantelpiece. Don't even think about that second slice of cake. The idea of ancestor veneration makes a lot of sense for a society transitioning from a nomadic existence, where the dead were often left behind or buried simply, to a settled life. Now, with permanent homes, came permanent graves and perhaps permanent representations of the dearly departed. These figures could have served as focal points for communal memory, a way to reinforce social bonds and group identity. They might have been consulted for guidance, offered prayers, or simply acknowledged as silent guardians of the family or clan. They represent a deep human need to connect with the past, to feel the continuity of life, to ensure that those who came before are not forgotten. Think of it as the ultimate "Remember Your Roots" campaign, but instead of a motivational poster, it's a 6-foot-tall plaster person staring into your soul. But then, you consider the alternative, deities. What if these aren't just Great Aunt Mildred, but something far grander, far more powerful? As societies grew more complex, and people moved from simply reacting to nature's whims to actively shaping their environment through agriculture, their understanding of the divine often shifted. Rather than spirits inhabiting every tree and rock, there emerged more defined, anthropomorphic gods and goddesses, often associated with fertility, harvest, protection, or the forces of nature that directly impacted their agricultural success. Mainstream historical fact time. It's widely understood that with the advent of settled agricultural communities during the Neolithic period, many human societies began to develop more structured religious systems, often featuring deities that reflected their dependence on the land and its bounty, moving beyond the more diffuse animistic beliefs of their hunter-gatherer forebears. So, perhaps these figures are the earliest known representations of the divine in this region. Perhaps they are a goddess of the harvest, her wide eyes watching over the fields, ensuring a bountiful yield. Or a god of protection, warding off disease or misfortune. Their neutral expressions, neither smiling nor frowning, could be interpreted as the serene, unchanging power of a deity. Imagine the villagers bringing offerings, kneeling before these silent guardians, hoping for a good rainy season or a healthy birth. It's a bit like having a celestial HR department, where you present your grievances and hopes to a very still, very quiet plaster manager, hoping they'll approve your divine leave request. Yet, the ambiguity persists. They are human-like, certainly, but not realistically human. Their large, often double-pupilled eyes seem to belong to a different plane of existence, while their lack of mouths gives them an almost otherworldly silence. This stylized representation could point to either ancestors whose features have been idealized or generalized over time, or to deities whose forms transcend mere mortal appearance. It's like trying to tell if a very abstract painting is a portrait of your uncle or a representation of the universe's existential dread. The precise nature of their veneration, however, remains a vibrant arena for scholarly debate, a gentle tug-of-war among the archaeological community, with compelling arguments on both sides. And what if it's both? What if, in the early stages of this settled society, the line between revered ancestor and minor deity was wonderfully, beautifully blurry? Perhaps a particularly influential ancestor, one whose deeds were legendary, slowly transcended mortal status in the collective memory, becoming a guardian spirit, or even a localized deity. Or perhaps the community saw their ancestors as their gods, their divine protectors. It's not uncommon in many cultures for the veneration of ancestors to bleed into a form of worship, where the dead are seen as powerful intermediaries or even divine beings themselves. Think of it as a spiritual promotion, where Great Uncle Bob, after a few centuries of good behavior, gets upgraded from beloved family member to minor god of irrigation. Consider also the materials themselves. The act of transforming humble limestone into brilliant white plaster, then molding it into these lifelike, or life-adjacent, forms, was a significant undertaking. Quirky tidbit alert. Some fringe theories even suggest that the very process of plaster production, involving the heating of limestone to transform it, might have been seen as a sacred, alchemical act, imbuing the resulting figures with a spiritual charge, regardless of whether they represented ancestors or deities. The material itself, born of fire and earth, might have been considered a conduit for the sacred. The sheer number of these figures also hints at their importance. This wasn't a one-off art project. This was a sustained communal effort, suggesting a deep-seated societal drive for their creation. If they were ancestors, it speaks to an incredibly strong emphasis on lineage and community memory. If they were deities, it points to a profound and pervasive religious belief system. Either way, they were clearly central to the spiritual and social fabric of Ain Ghazal. They were the silent witnesses to generations of daily life, agricultural cycles, births, and deaths. They were the embodiment of something vital to the community's identity and survival. You can almost feel the weight of their purpose, even now. They are not merely sculptures, they are vessels of meaning, imbued with the hopes, fears, and beliefs of a people who lived thousands of years ago. They stand as a testament to the human need to create, to represent, to connect with the unseen world, whether that world was populated by the spirits of their forebears or by the emerging pantheon of their gods. They whisper of a time when the sacred was woven intricately into the fabric of everyday life, when the boundary between the living and the spiritual was perhaps far more permeable than we imagine today. As you gaze at their enigmatic faces, you realize that the answer to ancestors, deities, or both might not be a simple either/or, but a profound reflection of a world where the spiritual landscape was as fertile and complex as the land they farmed. Now, imagine yourself in the hushed, cool embrace of the ancient earth, far beneath the bustling modern roads of Jordan. You've seen the bustling village, you've felt the plaster being mixed, you've even glimpsed the enigmatic faces of these plaster people. But what happens when their lives, or perhaps their purpose, comes to an end? You see, these weren't just discarded like yesterday's takeout containers. Oh no. The story of the Ain Ghazal statues takes a fascinating, almost tender, turn when you consider their ultimate fate, a careful, deliberate, and deeply ritualistic burial. You kneel beside an imagined excavation pit, the dry earth giving way to the soft brushstrokes of an archaeologist's tool. The air is still, thick with the scent of ancient dust and the quiet hum of discovery. It's here, in these carefully prepared caches and pits, that you uncover the most profound testament to their value. These were not simply thrown away when they were no longer needed. Instead, you find them laid to rest with a solemnity that speaks volumes about the reverence in which they were held. It's almost like they had a little retirement plan, only instead of a beach house in Florida, they got a cozy spot underground. Picture the scene. The community gathers, not in mourning perhaps, but in a moment of transition. These plaster figures, which had stood sentinel in homes or communal spaces, witnessing the ebb and flow of daily life, now reach a terminus. You see the hands that once molded them now carefully preparing their final resting place. Sometimes, you find them neatly arranged in pits dug specifically for this purpose. Other times, they're interred beneath the floors of abandoned houses, almost as if they were meant to remain a permanent, if hidden, part of the domestic landscape. It's a quiet, almost reverent process, far removed from the clamor of construction or the joyful chatter of creation. The carefulness is striking. You don't see signs of hasty disposal or disrespect. Instead, you observe figures laid on their backs, sometimes side by side, almost as if sleeping. The earth is gently mounded over them, a final blanket. It's a mainstream historical fact that many ancient cultures across the Near East practice some form of ritual deposition of objects, not just human remains, often signifying the end of a functional cycle or the release of power. The Ain Ghazal burials fit perfectly into this broader tradition, but with a unique plaster twist. You can almost hear the soft thud of earth being patted down, a final farewell. Now, here's where it gets a little quirky. Sometimes you find the statues intentionally broken before burial. Not shattered violently, but carefully dismantled. A head might be separated from a body, or a limb might be detached. Yet, these fragments are often found together, within the same burial pit, indicating not destruction, but a controlled, almost surgical, decommissioning. It's as if the act of breaking them was part of their end-of-life journey. A ritual, killing, or releasing of their essence, preparing them for their underground repose. Imagine, you've just spent weeks meticulously crafting these figures, only to carefully break them apart before tucking them into the earth. Talk about commitment. You'd think they'd have a fragile, handle with care sticker, but apparently, the ancient equivalent was break gently, then bury. This deliberate breakage has led to much scholarly debate. Archaeologists continue to debate if the breaking of some statues was an act of destruction, a necessary part of their ritualistic end, or perhaps even a way to prevent their power from being misused by others once their purpose was fulfilled. Was it a form of ritual purification? Or simply a practical way to fit them into smaller burial spaces? You ponder this as you imagine the community elders overseeing the process, their faces etched with solemn purpose, their understanding of these figures, lives, and deaths far removed from our modern concepts. You feel the cool dampness of the soil as you carefully brush away the last bits of earth from a figure's stylized face. It's a poignant moment. These objects, once vibrant and perhaps imbued with spiritual power, are now returning to the very earth from which their limestone components were originally derived. It's a full circle, a quiet, dignified return. You might even find multiple layers of these buried figures in a single pit, suggesting that these burial sites were reused over generations, becoming sacred repositories for the community's plaster ancestors or deities. It's like a very exclusive, subterranean club for retired plaster people. No. Lost and found. Box needed here. Everything is exactly where it's supposed to be. The reasons for these elaborate burials are still shrouded in the mists of time, but you can infer their significance. Perhaps it was a way to decommission figures that had served their purpose, making way for new ones. Maybe they were seen as having a finite lifespan, much like humans, and their burial marked their death and transition to another realm. Or perhaps they were a means of containing the spiritual power these figures were believed to embody, preventing it from dissipating or being misused. You close your eyes and almost hear the soft chanting, the quiet prayers, as these precious figures are lowered into their earthen tombs. Think about the sheer amount of effort involved. Not only did these people invest immense time and resources into creating these legions of plaster people, but they then dedicated further effort to their careful, ritualized interment. This wasn't just practical waste management. It was a profound act of cultural expression. It speaks to a deep spiritual connection, a belief system where objects could hold immense power and required respectful handling even after their active service was concluded. It shows a society that understood cycles of life, of purpose, and of return to the earth. As you slowly withdraw your hands from the imagined excavation, you feel a sense of quiet reverence for the people of Ain Ghazal. They lived in a world so different from ours, yet their respect for their creations, their understanding of life's transitions, resonates powerfully. The buried statues whisper tales not just of their own existence, but of the careful hands that made them, the eyes that revered them, and the solemn rituals that guided them to their final, quiet resting places. You realize that even in their burial, these figures continue to teach us about the complex spiritual lives of our ancient ancestors, long before written history began to record such intimate details. Their quiet slumber beneath the earth is a testament to a world where art, belief, and daily life were inextricably intertwined, and even the end was a beginning of sorts. You've now spent some quality time imagining the quiet hum of Ain Ghazal, the gentle scrape of tools against plaster, the focused concentration of ancient artisans. But here's the kicker: Ain Ghazal wasn't an isolated island of artistic genius. Oh no. As you drift further into the past, you begin to see it as a particularly vibrant thread in a much larger, incredibly rich tapestry of early human expression, stretching across the vast, sun-drenched landscapes of the Near East. It's like discovering your favorite indie band actually opened for a whole festival of equally mind-blowing acts you never knew existed. Imagine, if you will, the broad sweep of the Fertile Crescent, that crescent-shaped strip of land arcing from the Persian Gulf up through Mesopotamia and down the Levant. This was, as you might recall from your high school history class, or, let's be honest, that one documentary you half-watched while scrolling on your phone, the cradle of civilization. It's where humanity first put down roots, quite literally, with the advent of agriculture. This monumental shift, often dubbed the Neolithic Revolution, and yes, it really was revolutionary, like going from dial-up to fiber-optic internet overnight, didn't just change how people ate. It profoundly changed how they thought, how they lived, and crucially, how they expressed themselves. As communities embraced settled life, building permanent homes and cultivating the land, their worldviews expanded. They had more time, more resources, and perhaps a deeper connection to the land and the ancestors buried within it. This newfound stability fostered an explosion of creativity, a kind of ancient artistic renaissance. And Ain Ghazal, with its mesmerizing plaster figures, stands as a glittering beacon within this artistic explosion, but it's far from the only light. You see echoes of Ain Ghazal's unique blend of plaster artistry and ritualistic intent in other significant Neolithic sites across the region. Travel westward, across the Jordan River, perhaps by an ancient, slightly leaky raft, because, no bridges yet, and you arrive at Jericho, one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world. Here, archaeologists unearthed something equally arresting: plastered human skulls. These weren't just random bones. They were actual human crania, carefully remodeled with plaster to recreate facial features, often with shells for eyes, much like the Ain Ghazal statues. It's as if someone decided, you know what? Granddad's looking a bit rough. Let's give him a makeover that lasts millennia. The sheer dedication to preserving or reanimating the likeness of individuals, likely revered ancestors, speaks volumes about shared beliefs concerning lineage, memory, and the enduring presence of the dead among the living. The Jericho skulls, though different in form from the full-bodied Ain Ghazal statues, share a common thread: the meticulous use of plaster to create anthropomorphic representations for what appear to be ritualistic or commemorative purposes. It suggests a regional plaster cult, if you will, a shared understanding of this humble material's transformative power. The fact that different sites adapted this technique to different forms, full statues here, skulls there, points to a fascinating interplay of shared ideas and local innovation. Then, you might journey north, into what is now southeastern Turkey, to sites like Neolithic Quarry and Göbekli Tepe. These places, particularly Göbekli Tepe, are mind-bogglingly ancient, pushing back the timeline for monumental architecture and complex ritualistic structures far earlier than previously thought. While their artistry isn't primarily about plaster statues, you find highly stylized, often anthropomorphic or zoomorphic carvings on massive T-shaped pillars. These figures, though carved from stone, share a certain abstract quality, a focus on large eyes and prominent features, that resonates with the Ain Ghazal aesthetic. It's like they were all shopping at the same ancient, stylized eyes store. The connection here isn't about the material, but about the spirit of the representation, a move towards symbolic, larger-than-life figures that embody something beyond the mundane. Consider also the enigmatic site of Catalhook in central Anatolia, another sprawling Neolithic settlement that hums with the echoes of ancient life. Here you find intricate wall paintings, reliefs, and even plastered bull horns integrated into dwellings, suggesting a deep connection between art, daily life, and spiritual practice. While Catalhook doesn't have the same cache of freestanding plaster statues, it showcases an equally profound investment in symbolic representation within the domestic and communal spheres. The sheer scale and complexity of artistic expression at these various sites, whether it's the 8,000-year-old plaster figures from Ain Ghazal or the 11,000-year-old carved pillars of Göbekli Tepe, highlights a universal human drive to create, to connect with the unseen, and to leave a lasting mark. Historians still argue whether these similarities point to a direct cultural diffusion, where ideas and techniques literally spread from one community to another through trade, migration, or intermarriage, or if they represent independent parallel developments, arising from similar societal needs and cognitive frameworks. Was there an ancient influencer circuit, with traveling artisans sharing their plaster secrets? Or did different groups simply arrive at similar solutions to shared spiritual questions? It's a bit like trying to figure out if everyone started wearing skinny jeans because they saw someone else do it, or if it was just a collective unconscious fashion decision. The truth, as is often the case, is probably a complex blend of both. One quirky tidbit to consider is the widespread use of plaster itself. Beyond the statues and skulls, plaster was a revolutionary material in the Neolithic. It was used to create smooth, durable floors and walls, to line storage pits, and even to make vessels. Imagine the sheer joy of having a floor that wasn't just dirt. It was the ancient equivalent of discovering concrete, but with a much more organic, earthy feel. This mastery of plaster technology, derived from heating limestone, was a significant innovation in itself, allowing for not just artistic expression but also practical improvements in daily living. So, while you're marveling at the artistry, remember that the same hands might have just finished plastering their kitchen floor, too. Multitaskers, those ancients. The sheer proliferation of these types of figures and ritualistic objects across the Near East in the Neolithic period, from the northern reaches of Anatolia down to the Levant, underscores a shared cultural landscape, a web of interconnected communities grappling with similar existential questions. Who are we? Where do we come from? What happens after death? These are not new questions, you see. They are as old as settled humanity, and the answers, or at least the attempts at answers, were often expressed through art. The Ain Ghazal statues, therefore, aren't just isolated masterpieces. They are part of a grand conversation, a silent dialogue across millennia between different communities, all exploring their relationship with the divine, with their ancestors, and with their newly sedentary lives. They are testament to a profound shift in human consciousness, a time when the invisible world became visible through the meticulous work of human hands, transforming humble materials like plaster into powerful symbols. You can almost feel the collective energy of these ancient peoples, stretching out their artistic hands across the landscape, connecting with each other through shared beliefs, shared techniques, and shared visions of what it means to be human in a world that was rapidly changing. It makes you wonder what kind of art we'll leave behind for future archaeologists to ponder. Probably just a lot of selfies and cat videos. Ah, progress. You've journeyed with me through the accidental discovery, the bustling village, the ingenious plasterwork, and the quiet hands that brought these incredible figures to life. You've even peered into their enigmatic faces and considered their possible roles as ancestors or deities. But now, as the gentle hum of the ancient world settles around you like a soft blanket, we arrive at perhaps the most profound question of all. Why, what in the world, or rather, what in the Neolithic world, compelled these people to embark on such an elaborate, resource-intensive, and frankly, mind-boggling artistic endeavor? Imagine, for a moment, the sheer scale of the undertaking. This wasn't just a weekend pottery class for a few artistic souls. We're talking about dozens, potentially hundreds, of these statues. Each one required a meticulous process, from quarrying limestone and burning it in kilns, which, by the way, needed a lot of fuel, meaning a lot of wood to gather, to mixing the plaster, sculpting, drying, and then, eventually, carefully burying them. This wasn't a hobby, it was a societal imperative. It was the ancient equivalent of deciding, as a community, to build a new civic center, a grand cathedral, and perhaps a very large, extremely slow-moving, public art project, all at the same time. Without, power tools or a project manager named Brenda who sends out passive-aggressive emails about deadlines. The answer, as you might suspect, lies deep within the very fabric of Ain Ghazal's burgeoning society. Remember, this wasn't a tiny, isolated band of hunter-gatherers anymore. This was a sprawling settlement, a true proto-city, bursting at the seams with people. As communities grow, so do their complexities, their needs, and their internal pressures. It's like when your small, cozy family suddenly decides to host the entire extended family for Thanksgiving. Suddenly, you need more chairs, more food, and definitely more rules about who gets to watch what on TV. One of the most significant pressures was simply numbers. As Ain Ghazal swelled, with estimates suggesting a population of up to 3,000 people at its peak, the traditional social structures based purely on kinship ties began to stretch and fray. You can easily manage a small band of 20 or 30 people, most of whom are direct relatives. Everyone knows everyone else, disputes are handled face to face, and shared experiences bind them together. But when you have hundreds, then thousands, of individuals living in close proximity, many of whom aren't directly related, you need new ways to foster cohesion, to create a shared identity that transcends immediate family bonds. This is a mainstream historical fact. The shift from mobile hunter-gatherer bands to large, settled agricultural communities fundamentally reshaped human social organization, necessitating new forms of governance, resource management, and social glue. The statues, in a very tangible way, were part of that glue. They were a visual manifestation of a collective spirit, a shared heritage, and a common purpose. Imagine the daily life in Ain Ghazal. You're not just hunting for your next meal anymore. You're farming, tending fields, managing water, storing surpluses, and dealing with waste from a large population. There are more resources to manage, more potential for disputes over land or livestock, and a greater need for shared decision-making. In such an environment, the statues likely served multiple, interwoven purposes. They were anchors, both literal and metaphorical, grounding the community in its past, its beliefs, and its shared future. Perhaps they were powerful symbols of ancestor veneration, a way to connect the living community with the wisdom and protection of those who came before. In a society without written records, these figures could embody the collective memory, the lineage of the community, reminding everyone of their shared roots. Or maybe they were representations of powerful deities, invoked for protection, fertility, or success in their agricultural endeavors. Historians still argue whether the Ain Ghazal statues primarily represented revered ancestors, powerful deities, or perhaps even a blend of both, reflecting a worldview where the spiritual and the ancestral were deeply intertwined. The debate highlights the profound spiritual awakening that accompanied the Neolithic revolution, as settled communities developed more complex cosmologies. Beyond the spiritual, there was a very practical, sociological drive. These statues were a massive communal undertaking. Think about it, every person, from the youngest child to the oldest elder, would have had a role to play, however small. Someone had to gather the limestone, someone else had to tend the fires for the kilns, others had to fetch water, prepare food for the artisans, or even just keep the children from running off with the wet plaster. This kind of monumental effort, requiring coordination and cooperation on a grand scale, serves to bind a community together. It fosters a sense of shared ownership and collective accomplishment. It's the ultimate team-building exercise, without the trust falls or awkward icebreakers. You work together, you sweat together, and you create something magnificent together. This shared labor, this collective effervescence, as sociologists might call it, that buzz of excitement and solidarity that emerges when a group is engaged in a common, meaningful activity, would have been incredibly powerful for reinforcing group identity and cohesion. It's a quirky tidbit to consider. The very act of making the statues was as important for social bonding as the finished product itself. Moreover, these figures likely played a role in social stratification and identity. In a world without formal titles or elaborate personal possessions, these communal works could have served as visible markers of the community's status and power. Look at us. They might have silently proclaimed to neighboring settlements. We are strong, we are unified, and we have the resources and organization to create something truly monumental. It's the prehistoric equivalent of a town building the biggest, most impressive town hall, purely to show off a little. Our town statues are bigger than your town statues. Though, to be fair, there's no evidence of statue-based competitive sports. The societal drive also stemmed from the need to manage internal social friction. With more people, there are inevitably more disagreements. Shared rituals, communal symbols, and a collective belief system embodied by these figures could have provided a framework for resolving conflicts, reinforcing norms, and maintaining harmony. When everyone believes in the same powerful ancestors or deities, and participates in the same rituals centered around these figures, it creates a powerful shared reality that transcends individual grievances. It's a reminder that everyone is part of something larger than themselves, a shared legacy that demands cooperation. Ultimately, the creation of the Ain Ghazal statues was not an artistic whim. It was a profound societal response to the monumental changes brought about by the Neolithic revolution. It was their way of navigating the complexities of large-scale settled life, of building community, establishing identity, reinforcing beliefs, and managing the intricate web of human relationships. These figures whispered tales not just of spiritual devotion, but of profound social engineering, of a community striving to define itself and endure in a rapidly changing world. They stand as a testament to the ingenuity and adaptability of early human societies, who, without the benefit of written language or modern organizational charts, found ways to unite, to believe, and to create, leaving behind a legacy that continues to reshape our understanding of their complex world. You know, sometimes in life, you stumble upon something so utterly precious, so incredibly fragile, that the mere act of looking at it feels like a risk. It's like holding a soap bubble in a hurricane, or trying to transport a house of cards across a bumpy road. And that, my friends, is precisely the delicate dance that began the moment those ancient Ain Ghazal statues first peeked out from their millennia-long slumber. Imagine, if you will, the initial discovery. Not by an archaeologist with a finely tuned trowel and a year's supply of patience, but by a road crew. You're there, perhaps, with your hard hat tilted back, watching the heavy machinery churn up the earth. There's the rumble, the dust, the expectation of nothing more exciting than another layer of ancient dirt. Then, suddenly, something different. A glint of white, a strange shape. And as the initial excitement, perhaps even a bit of a "What on earth is that?" gives way, the true challenge begins to loom. Because what you're looking at, what you're about to touch, is not solid rock or sturdy pottery. It's chalky, it's brittle, and it's been waiting for you for 9,000 years. It's like finding a priceless antique vase, but it's made of dried meringue and has been buried under a truck stop for a few millennia. Good luck with that. The immediate realization, once the experts arrived, was that these weren't just old things. They were incredibly fragile old things. We're talking about unbaked lime plaster, a material that, while revolutionary for its time, tends to become rather delicate after being buried for eons. It absorbs moisture, it reacts with salts in the soil, and it can become so brittle that a strong gust of wind or an accidental bump could turn a masterpiece into a pile of dust. It's the archaeological equivalent of trying to perform open-heart surgery on a hummingbird using chopsticks. The level of care required was, and still is, almost unfathomable to the modern mind, accustomed as we are to instant gratification and things that are, durable. So, the first step, once the initial shock wore off and the area was secured, was to transition from, "Oh my goodness, what is that?" to, "How on earth do we get this out without turning it into a very old, very expensive pile of powder?" This is where the meticulous, almost meditative work of the archaeological conservator truly begins. You swap out the heavy machinery for tools that look like they belong in a dentist's office, or perhaps a particularly obsessive nail technician's kit. We're talking about tiny trowels, dental picks, and brushes so soft they're usually reserved for applying blush to a newborn. You're not digging anymore, you're caressing the earth away, grain by infinitesimal grain. You're lying on your stomach, perhaps, for hours, in the dry, dusty air, the sun beating down, or maybe under a protective tent. Your eyes are strained, your muscles ache, but your focus is absolute. You carefully, painstakingly, brush away the soil, revealing more of the ancient form. Each whisper of a camel hair brush, each tiny scrape of a wooden pick, is a decision. Is this dirt? Is this part of the statue? Is it a fragment that has broken off? The process is excruciatingly slow, a test of patience that would make a monk blush. Forget your Netflix binge, this is the ultimate slow burn drama, where the stakes are the very fabric of human history. As more of the statue is exposed, the fragility becomes even more apparent. Sometimes the plaster is so delicate, so utterly spent from its long burial, that it can't even support its own weight. It's like trying to lift a wet piece of tissue paper without tearing it. This is where a truly ingenious, albeit incredibly laborious, technique comes into play, the block lift. Instead of trying to extract the statue itself, you extract the entire block of earth surrounding it. Imagine it. You carefully excavate a trench around the statue, leaving a pedestal of earth on which it rests. Then, you meticulously undercut that pedestal, sliding a rigid support, often a wooden board or metal tray, underneath. You then encase the entire block, statue, surrounding dirt, and all, in a protective plaster jacket, like a giant, very fragile cast. It's a bit like giving a 9,000-year-old patient a full-body cast before they've even left the operating theater. This process is not for the faint of heart. It requires a tremendous amount of teamwork, coordination, and a healthy dose of anxiety. You can almost hear the collective held breath as the massive, heavy, and incredibly delicate block is finally separated from the ground. Then comes the nerve-wracking transport, often on custom-built sleds or reinforced platforms, away from the excavation site and towards the controlled environment of a conservation laboratory. It's a journey where every bump in the road feels like a potential catastrophe. Once in the lab, the real magic, and the even more painstaking work, begins. These aren't just any labs. They are specialized facilities designed to mimic ideal conditions, often with precise temperature and humidity controls. You step into a world of quiet concentration, where the air hums with the gentle thrum of dehumidifiers and the occasional whispered instruction. Here, the conservators, modern-day alchemists with a deep respect for the past, begin the arduous task of liberating the statues from their earthen cocoons. Using the same tiny tools, often under microscopes, they slowly, methodically, remove the remaining earth. Each grain is precious, as it holds clues about the statue's original context. They might use tiny scalpels, soft brushes, or even specialized vacuum pens to gently lift away debris. One of the quirky challenges with ancient plaster, especially that made from burnt limestone like the Ain Ghazal figures, is its susceptibility to soluble salts. Over millennia, groundwater can carry salts into the porous plaster, and as the water evaporates, these salts crystallize, expanding and literally pushing the plaster apart from the inside. It's like having tiny, invisible demolition crews working within the very fabric of the statue. So, part of the conservation process often involves very careful, controlled desalination, sometimes involving humid environments or even gentle, long baths. Though with these specific statues, the fragility often limits such aggressive treatments. It's a constant scholarly debate among conservators. How much intervention is too much? When does preserving become altering? Do you reconstruct a missing nose, or leave it as a testament to time's passage? Historians still argue whether certain conservation treatments, even if effective, truly maintain the original integrity or introduce new, irreversible changes. Once cleaned, the true extent of the damage, the cracks, the missing pieces, becomes horrifyingly clear. The statues often emerge in hundreds, sometimes thousands of fragments. This is where the reconstruction phase begins, which is less like putting together an IKEA cabinet, because at least IKEA gives you instructions, albeit terrible ones, and more like solving a 3D jigsaw puzzle where half the pieces are missing, and the ones you have are crumbling. Conservators use archival quality adhesives, often reversible ones, to bond the fragments. The principle of do no harm is paramount in modern conservation. Any treatment should ideally be reversible, so future generations with better technology can retreat if necessary. This means no super glue, no duct tape, no good enough solutions. Every decision is documented, every adhesive chosen with meticulous care. Imagine the focus required to match a tiny shard, knowing it might be the corner of an eye or the curve of a cheek. It's a slow dance between scientific analysis and artistic intuition. They might use plaster fills to bridge gaps, carefully color matching them to blend seamlessly while still being distinguishable upon close inspection. The goal isn't necessarily to make them look brand new, but to stabilize them, make them whole enough to understand, and ensure their survival for centuries to come. Finally, the statues, now stabilized and reassembled, find their new homes in museum environments. But the work doesn't stop there. They live in climate-controlled showcases, protected from fluctuations in temperature and humidity that could cause further damage. The light levels are carefully controlled, as even ambient light can degrade ancient materials over time. It's a perpetual act of guardianship, an ongoing commitment to preserving these silent witnesses from a world long gone. From the accidental discovery by a road crew to their current resting places, each statue represents not just the artistry of its ancient makers, but the incredible dedication of countless individuals who have worked tirelessly to pull them from the earth and preserve them, piece by agonizing piece, for all of us to wonder at. It's a testament to human ingenuity, both ancient and modern, and a quiet reminder that some of history's most profound whispers are also its most fragile. You're drifting now, aren't you? Just letting the words wash over you, like a gentle tide pulling you further into the past. We've navigated the whispers of ancient rituals and the quiet dedication of those long-lost artisans. But here, with section 14, we hit the big one. This is where the story of Ain Ghazal stops being just a fascinating archaeological dig and starts becoming a full-blown, academic mic drop. Because these unique finds, these silent plaster people, didn't just add a new chapter to prehistory. They grabbed the existing textbook, underlined entire paragraphs, and wrote, "Wrong!" in big, bold, permanent marker. Before Ain Ghazal, you see, the prevailing wisdom about the Neolithic period, that glorious time when humanity finally decided to put down roots and try this farming thing, tended to paint a picture of societies that were, shall we say, a little less extra. We imagine them as ingenious, certainly, figuring out agriculture and building sturdy homes, but largely focused on survival. Their art, if it existed on a grand scale, was thought to be more functional, perhaps symbolic in a simple way, or restricted to smaller, more manageable forms. Large-scale, complex artistic endeavors? Those were usually reserved for the big leagues of later civilizations, like the Egyptians with their pyramids, or the Mesopotamians with their ziggurats. You know, the societies with kings, armies, and what we traditionally define as states. The Neolithic, by contrast, was often viewed as a kind of warm-up act, a crucial but comparatively primitive prelude to true complexity. It was like thinking your grandpa only ever listened to elevator music, only to discover he was a secret techno DJ in his youth. Then Ain Ghazal burst onto the scene, quite literally, with its accidental discovery. And suddenly you're faced with dozens upon dozens of these strikingly sophisticated plaster figures. Not crude lumps, but stylized, elegant, sometimes haunting representations that clearly required immense skill, planning, and a deep understanding of materials. Imagine the collective gasp in the archaeological community. It was like finding out that your local community theater group, instead of putting on a modest play, had somehow staged a full-blown Broadway musical with elaborate sets and a cast of hundreds, all without anyone noticing. It was utterly baffling, and utterly brilliant. What these statues unequivocally demonstrated was that early human societies, specifically those flourishing in the Neolithic Levant around 9,000 years ago, were capable of a level of social organization, resource management, and abstract thought that simply hadn't been credited to them before. Think about it, creating just one of these figures was a monumental task. You needed to quarry limestone, burn it at high temperatures to produce lime, then mix it carefully with water to create plaster. This isn't just a casual afternoon craft project. This is industrial-scale chemistry for the Stone Age. And they did it repeatedly, for hundreds of figures. This implies a highly organized labor force, specialists who knew the secrets of plaster, and a community capable of coordinating such a massive, sustained effort. Who was in charge of the supply chain for all that limestone? Who managed the fuel for the kilns? And yes, the sheer volume of fuel needed for those kills might even suggest a surprisingly early form of resource management, perhaps even rudimentary forest management, which is a quirky little thought, isn't it? They weren't just chopping down trees willy-nilly, they might have been thinking ahead. The sheer scale of the undertaking challenges the old narrative that Neolithic communities were small, relatively egalitarian, and primarily focused on subsistence. To produce so many large, non-utilitarian objects suggests a surplus of resources, time, and critically, a shared belief system or societal purpose strong enough to motivate such a massive communal investment. It implies a degree of social cohesion and perhaps even a form of early leadership or collective decision-making that goes far beyond what was previously assumed for this period. You don't just wake up one morning and decide, "Hey, let's make 30 plaster statues today," without some serious planning and buy-in from the whole neighborhood. It's like trying to organize a potluck where everyone brings a 5-course meal. It only works if everyone is truly committed. This revelation forced archaeologists and historians to reevaluate the very definition of complex society. If a society can plan and execute such elaborate artistic projects, if it can dedicate significant resources to non-subsistence activities, and if it can coordinate the labor of potentially hundreds of individuals over an extended period, is it still primitive? The answer, thanks to Ain Ghazal, became a resounding no. It pushed back the timeline for when we see these features emerging. It showed that complexity wasn't just a sudden explosion with the first cities, but a gradual, organic development with deep roots in these earlier, seemingly simpler, agricultural communities. It's like discovering your favorite band was actually touring for years in tiny clubs before they hit the big stadium. The complexity was always there, just waiting for the right moment to shine. Furthermore, the very nature of the statues, their distinct features, the careful burials, the implied ritualistic significance, opened new avenues for understanding early human spirituality and identity. These weren't just decorative items, they were imbued with meaning, perhaps serving as representations of ancestors, deities, or a combination of both. This suggests a rich inner life, a shared cosmology, and a sophisticated approach to the sacred. It means that while they were busy figuring out how to grow wheat and build mud brick houses, they were also wrestling with existential questions, creating narratives, and forging communal bonds through shared belief and artistic expression. This isn't just about survival, it's about meaning. And historians still argue whether the scale of this artistic output suggests a nascent form of organized religion or simply a powerful, shared cultural identity that manifested in profound artistic expression. The line between the two, especially in prehistory, can be wonderfully blurry, like trying to tell the difference between a really good dream and a memory. So, in essence, Ain Ghazal didn't just add a few more dots to our map of prehistory. It redrew the entire map. It demonstrated that before the advent of grand temples and towering urban centers, people were already organizing themselves on a surprising scale, engaging in sophisticated artistic practices, and developing complex spiritual lives. It made us realize that the human story is far richer, far more nuanced, and far more artistically ambitious than we had ever dared to imagine for the early Neolithic. It's a powerful reminder that ancient doesn't mean simple, and that the quiet construction of a plaster statue thousands of years ago can still, in its own way, rewrite the very pages of our understanding. You've journeyed with me now, haven't you? From the dusty, accidental revelation of those road workers, through the bustling, plaster dust-filled streets of ancient Ain Ghazal, and into the quiet, meticulous workshops where those enigmatic figures first took shape. You've seen the profound shift from nomadic wanderers to settled farmers, felt the stirrings of early spiritual belief, and even imagined the precise, careful hands of artisans coaxing form from wet, humble limestone. We've pondered their possible meanings, ancestors, gods, guardians, and even witnessed their solemn, ritualistic burials, a final, respectful farewell. And you've understood how these plaster people, these silent sentinels, completely rewrote whole chapters of prehistory, showing us a complexity we hadn't dared to dream of for such an early time. But now, as the gentle hum of the past begins to fade, you find yourself standing at the edge of a vast, shimmering lake of unanswered questions. It's a beautiful, mysterious expanse, reflecting the moonlight of millennia. You see the Ain Ghazal statues, still, silent, captivating, and even after all our exploration, they whisper tales you can almost hear, but can't quite translate. It's like trying to understand a dream you had last night. The feelings are vivid, the imagery striking, but the plot, well, the plot's a bit fuzzy, isn't it? Think about it, what exactly was their purpose? We've thrown around ideas like ancestors, deities, or perhaps even effigies of the recently deceased, meant to hold a piece of their spirit. Were they like ancient action figures, each with a specific role in a grand, prehistoric narrative we're only now beginning to glimpse? Or were they more like very, very old family photos, brought out for special occasions, perhaps with a side of ritualistic chanting? Did people offer them food, or precious beads, or perhaps even just quiet thoughts and prayers? Were they consulted before big hunts or planting seasons, like an ancient oracle that didn't actually speak, but whose silence was profoundly meaningful? The truth is, we don't have a definitive answer. We can only infer from the careful creation and burial that their role was deeply significant, woven into the very fabric of daily life and spiritual practice. Archaeologists continue to debate whether these figures represent specific individuals, idealized types, or perhaps even a synthesis of both, embodying collective memory and spiritual aspiration. It's the kind of scholarly squabble that keeps everyone on their toes, and occasionally leads to very passionate arguments over lukewarm coffee at conferences, often punctuated by someone dramatically pointing at a blurry photo of a plaster nose. And why so many? We talked about legions of plaster people, remember? Over 250 fragments, representing at least 32 full figures. That's a lot of plaster, a lot of skill, and an astronomical amount of collective effort for a community without forklifts or power tools. Imagine the project manager trying to hit those deadlines. No, Brenda, we need another dozen plaster heads by sunup. The ancestors are getting restless. You wonder if they ever had a plaster shortage day, where everyone just sat around grumbling because the limestone quarry was empty. This wasn't a one-off art project, it was a sustained, generations-long commitment. Was it a continuous, ongoing production, perhaps tied to the ebb and flow of life and death within the community? Or were there specific periods of intense creation, perhaps tied to major societal events, like a particularly good harvest, or a surprisingly dry rainy season? We simply don't know the rhythm of their creation, only that it happened, repeatedly, over what must have been generations, suggesting a deeply ingrained cultural practice. And who were the artisans? Were they a specialized class, like the master sculptors of later civilizations, perhaps revered figures themselves, their hands guided by tradition and perhaps even divine inspiration? Or was it a more communal effort, with different people contributing to different stages of the process, a kind of ancient plaster-making bee where everyone brought their enthusiasm and perhaps a bit of elbow grease? You can almost picture the scene, one group mixing the plaster, another shaping the armature, a third meticulously smoothing the faces. Were their apprentices learning the trade, sworn to secrecy about the ancient plaster formula, perhaps passing down techniques through whispered instructions and patient demonstrations rather than written manuals? We have no written records, no how-to guides from 7000 BC. We're piecing together a workshop from faint echoes and tool marks, trying to understand a craft that vanished with its creators, taking their secrets with them. Then there's the curious case of their burial. These weren't just tossed into a pit like old rubbish. Oh no. You witnessed the careful, deliberate interment. They were often placed in caches, sometimes side by side, sometimes arranged in ways that suggest a final, solemn ritual. Was this their death? A ceremonial decommissioning when their spiritual power waned, or when the person or deity they represented was no longer actively worshipped? Was it a way of preserving them, like burying a time capsule for future generations, though perhaps not our generation? Or was it a more pragmatic act, simply clearing out the old to make way for the new, but doing so with reverence? It's a bit like burying your old beloved teddy bear, isn't it? You can't just throw him out, but he can't sit on your bed forever. There's an emotional weight to it, a respect for something that once held significance, a quiet acknowledgement of an end to a purpose. Maybe they even whispered goodbyes as they tucked them into their earthy beds, ensuring their spiritual essence would remain at peace, or perhaps return to the very earth from which the limestone came. And what about the society itself? How did Ain Ghazal sustain such a monumental artistic endeavor? It implies a level of social organization, resource management, and perhaps even a surplus of food and labor that allowed some individuals to dedicate their time to art rather than just subsistence. We often think of early Neolithic societies as solely focused on survival, but Ain Ghazal shows us something richer, more complex, something that hints at a deep cultural and spiritual life alongside the daily grind of farming. This wasn't just about putting food on the table. It was about building a shared identity, expressing profound beliefs, solidifying social hierarchies, and perhaps even creating a tangible link to the divine or ancestral realm. It's a mainstream historical fact that the Neolithic Revolution, while fundamentally changing human society from hunter-gatherer to agrarian, also laid the groundwork for complex social structures, specialization of labor, and the rise of monumental art and architecture. Ain Ghazal is a shining example of this, pushing the timeline for such complexity back even further, making us wonder just how sophisticated these early communities truly were. Consider also the quirky tidbit that some researchers have suggested the remarkably large, wide-open eyes of the statues might have served a very specific, almost magical purpose. Perhaps they were designed to be ever watchful, to ward off malevolent spirits, or to act as conduits for spiritual presence, allowing the figures to see into the human world and beyond. It's a fascinating idea, isn't it? A prehistoric CCTV system, but for your soul. Or maybe they just thought big eyes looked really cool and expressive. Who are we to judge ancient aesthetics? And finally, the ultimate mystery: why did the practice of making them cease? Ain Ghazal itself continued for a time after the last statues were buried, but the artistic tradition faded. Did the beliefs change? Did the community face a crisis that shifted their priorities? Did they simply run out of good plaster-grade limestone? That last one is a joke, mostly. But you never know with ancient resource management. The site was eventually abandoned, like so many settlements of its era, leaving us to wonder about the final chapters of this remarkable community. You see, the Ain Ghazal statues don't just tell us what we know about the past. They powerfully remind us of how much we don't know. They are silent witnesses to a world we can barely imagine, a world of budding agriculture, settled life, and profound spiritual awakenings. They stand, or rather, lie, carefully preserved, as testaments to human ingenuity, artistic drive, and the enduring need to make sense of our place in the cosmos, even when that cosmos is just beginning to reveal its secrets. They are a constant invitation to wonder, to imagine, and to accept that some of the greatest stories are told not with words, but with plaster, silently, across thousands of years. They whisper, not just of who they were, but of the endless possibilities of what humanity was, and what we might still become. Now let your mind drift away from the dust and the mysteries, from the ancient hands and the silent figures. Feel the soft, gentle weight of your blanket, a quiet comfort after our journey through time. The images of Ain Ghazal, of those wide-eyed plaster people, are gently fading now, becoming soft echoes in the quiet corners of your thoughts. There's no need to grasp at them, no need to solve their ancient riddles tonight. Just let them soften, like shadows at dusk, until they are almost imperceptible. The past, with all its wonder and all its questions, is a vast, beautiful ocean, and we have only dipped our toes in its calming waters. You are safe now, nestled in your own time, far from the bustling ancient village, far from the quiet workshops. The whispers of Ain Ghazal are growing fainter, softer, dissolving into the stillness of the night. Feel your breath slow, deep and even, a gentle rhythm that soothes every part of you. Let the last thoughts of ancient mysteries gently recede, replaced by a profound sense of peace. You are cared for, you are comfortable, and all the questions of the world can wait for another dawn. Just rest now, and let the quiet take you.